وينضم إلينا الآن سانديب شرما رئيس الاستثمار في سنتاكس كابيتال. أهلا بك سانديب معنا. يعني بعد هذه التدفقات الكبيرة للأسهم الأمريكية في شهر نوفمبر شهدنا أفضل أداء للأسهم الأمريكية خلال هذا العام الشهر الماضي. هل تتوقع مع سانتا رالي والعوامل الأخرى ديسمبر أيضا سيكون مشابه لنوفمبر؟
Thank you for having me on your show. And yes, I think the rally will probably continue, although I think we're going to run into a little bit of a headwind here because a lot of the good information about the prospects of a new administration have already been priced in. Secondly, I think even more critical than the election outcome has been the appointment of the new Treasury Secretary, who I think will be very, very instrumental in guiding through a very challenging refinancing of the U.S. debt. So I think that is a very critical outlook in addition to the Fed. The role of the Treasury Secretary will be very, very important going into next year. But for the near term, I think a lot of good information is priced in.
هل ترى بأنه الروم فور أبسايد يعني أو مجال الارتفاع قد يكون أكبر بالنسبة للراسل 2000 أو لمؤشر الشركات الصغيرة والمتوسطة الحجم بالمقارنة مع S&P 500 داو أو حتى ناسداك؟
I do. I think, as you mentioned correctly, the small cap and mid cap should do quite well. And we can see they have even though the S&Ps performed really well in the month of November, the small caps, mid caps, financials, regional banks have been absolutely stellar, rising between 7 to as much as 14% in the month of November. So I think that is certainly going to continue. We are very hopeful, however, going into next year, looking at, on a contrarian basis, areas that have not done well but should do quite well, which would be more in the area of commodities, materials, and so on.
أنا دائما أعلم سانديب بأنك لا تلحق في الترند ولكن تحاول اقتناص الفرص هنا وهناك وليس شرطا أن تكون الولايات المتحدة. اليوم أين تبحث عنها؟ أشرت بعض القطاعات في الطاقة في الموارد الأساسية. هل تراها في الولايات المتحدة الفرص لا زالت قائمة أم أنك تنظر إلى أوروبا أسواق الناشئة الصين؟ أين هي الفرص التي قد نشهد فيها الريسك للأعلى أكبر more to the upside?
Well, I think the emerging markets have lagged, U.S. markets by a very, very wide margin. Ex-U.S. equities have had the worst relative performance forever in this year. So on a contrarian basis, I do think that some of the ex-US markets should do well for two reasons. One is that they have lagged, so there would be better values. The valuations are better. However, the other part is more important: is what kind of actions will these countries take. For example, there's a big debate going on in France for rolling back the taxes, and there's a significant fight for looking for a growth agenda. Similarly, in China, we are waiting, which I think will probably happen this month or next month, for the Chinese government to launch some kind of a fiscal bazooka, because they really need to stimulate their economy. Otherwise, they will not only have trouble at home, but they will have a lot of trouble competing with the U.S. So when that happens, I think, the ex-US markets in Europe as well as emerging markets can do quite well. I think Japan could do quite well. And but the precondition for that is that they would have to come up with their own growth agenda and not get into a head-on tariff-related fight.
للعام 2025 هل ترى بأن ال 60-40 بورتفوليو أو محفظة من 60% أسهم و40% سندات ستكون استراتيجية نافعة بالنظر إلى وجود ترامب في البيت الأبيض؟
I think it's a challenging question because the answer to that question really lies in whether the administration decides to take a lot of the pain with the economy in the early part of their administration. If they do that, then we could have some challenging times. However, we think that the employment data is probably going to be, downgraded. So we're going to find that we did not create as many jobs in the last year as we think we did. And that is going to allow the Fed to lower rates, as well as as I mentioned earlier, if the Treasury Secretary is able to navigate, rolling over U.S. debt next year, that should lower the pressure on 10-year Treasuries. So if that happens, then I think the fixed income side of the 60-40 should do very well. We would also encourage that, the new 60-40 would probably need to be amended to allow for some room for commodities. So I think something like a 60-30-10 kind of a portfolio with 10% allocation to commodities probably should do quite well.
وأنا سأزيد أيضا من عندي 5% للالترناتيف أسيتس والبرايفت ماركتس. وأشكرك سانديب شرما رئيس الاستثمار في سنتاكس كابيتال.